So I'm going to demand of you something, and I'm going to. The experiment is this: there's a lot of different ways you can study the Bible. None of them are really perfect, but they're different ways of doing it. And today we're going to do one that I just call meditative study. So what you do is you sit with a passage of Scripture, often when it's very familiar to you, and you sit with that passage of Scripture. And you read it, and many times it's memorized. You know it so well. And the one you'll see today, you'll recognize. And you sit back and you close your eyes and you think through and meditate on the different portions of what you see right there to sort of to amplify what's there that you normally would just gloss over so fast. So I'm going to ask you to participate in doing that with us this morning. So are you with us? Yeah. Okay. So we are in the season of Advent, and remember last time I talked about the fact that Advent is the coming of the Messiah, and it's like the imminent coming. It's not like the long decades or centuries of coming. It's like it's imminent. It's like right now. It's Advent right now, and so that's the Advent season. And the Advent season on many church calendars is quite prescribed. There's four Sundays in Advent. You do 4 certain things in Advent. We don't do those. Because we're rebels, but we're still going to talk about Advent because we're coming up to Christmas. So that just makes a lot of sense. And Christmas is now, 11 days away? There's panic on some faces. Thanks for the reminder. Okay, well, let's just do this. Let's calm down and let's kind of meditate on a passage that might have gone past you. I'm going to introduce it in a silly way. So here's the manger scene. That's not silly. But in the manger scene, which is so familiar to us, here's this very famous passage out of Isaiah, and I'm going to give you my translation of this passage today. Okay, here's my translation of this passage. There's this baby. It's a boy. See, this is pithy translations. He will be in politics. His reputation will include such things as... he's a good listener. He seems to get a lot done. He's always around. He has an old soul. And he helps people get along. Pithy. It's pithy. Okay, I did it this way because contrast is a wonderful way to do meditation on Scripture. The contrast here is Jim's stupid, simple translation, and then we're going to contrast it with what's actually in the passage, verse by verse, to see if there's an emphasis we're missing. Okay, so we start with this very crude translation first, and then we'll do a comparison. Okay, so here we go. Are you ready for this? This is the actual passage. We read it once already today. This is the one where you hear so often. You hear it in Handel's Messiah. You see it printed all over the place. There's just tons about this passage that you know so well about. So we're going to slow down. And this is the only passage of Scripture we're going to look at today. And we're going to presume that maybe we're missing something by going over it so fast or so familiar. So this is the passage that I so crudely translated. And what we're going to do now is take it a phrase at a time. And I'm gonna bring it open to you to say what is different between my crude translation and what's actually written there. This is the experiment today. If this goes badly, we'll never do this again. But let's just try this today. Let's see how this goes. Okay, so here's the section we're going to look at first. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. And to remind you of my crude translation, I said, there will be this baby, it will be a boy. Now, what is it in the original translation from Isaiah that jumps out to you as being so different from I just gave you the facts. A baby's born, it's a boy. What's different in what Isaiah? Now, this is where you actually speak. So, given to us. Okay, that begs a question. Given from who? Right? But to us twice. So, this baby... who's a boy, is given to us. And those prepositions, the prepositions with the to us, is just, it changes this entire passage tremendously. This is language that you would normally apply like to parents or grandparents. You know, we have a baby today, right? It's been given to us, right? So there's sort of something unnatural going on here. There's a baby. This is literally a human being. But this human being is being given to us. So it not only implies that there's a giver, right? But it also implies there's a purpose. And for our benefit, to us, not just in general, but to us. It's a very personal kind of thing. So this birth that we see is not just in Jim's stupid translation, there will be a baby, it will be a boy, but the fact that this baby, literally human being, will be given to us for a purpose from God himself. We talked about a couple weeks ago about this word Emmanuel, God with us. It seems to really smack of that idea that from heaven itself, this person is given to us for our benefit, and he's given to us. We didn't earn it. He's just given to us. So, I mean, we know that in our minds. We know that about Christmas. But if you just reduce Christmas to the stupid, simple thing that I said, well, there is this manger, there is a baby, it's a boy, everything's wonderful, let's celebrate. No, this is a very purposeful, deliberate giving. The other thing that's really fascinating about this is that in that phrase that Isaiah uses, it sort of hints about the crucifixion. Hints. It kind of smells like it. There's something about the fact that this child has been given to us. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given. The given part starts to hint about the fact that, well, given for what? And we know that in the whole story of Jesus and the cosmic view from God's perspective about salvation for mankind, that given thing is for salvation. Because when Nicodemus snuck in the dark and sat down with Jesus, and they had this great conversation that John records for us in chapter 3 of John's Gospel, he says, God so loved the world that he gave. Unto us a son is born. Unto us a son is given. God gives. So just in that opening phrase, what's coming next, although it's very regal, it's very majestic, and it's very familiar to us, it sets everything in context from here on out as being extraordinarily personal to you. God has given us a son for our benefit. So then the question at this point, if you don't know what's coming, is for what? What did he give the son to us for? I mean, when we have children, we know that this child has great hopes and expectations on the parents' parts. We don't know where this child's going to go in life. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, we do know that this child is here, and now we wait for it to unfold. In this particular case, since this child is given from heaven, the purpose is known and it's deliberate, and it's for you. So everything that comes after this is for you. To us, a son is given. Ooh, so let that kind of flavor everything that comes after this. Okay, let me show you I'll filter in a few passages as we go. The angels, as they appeared to the shepherds in Luke 2, they say, for unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord, or if you literally in Greek, who is the Messiah, the Lord, the promised one, the anointed one from the Old Testament. And this will be a sign for you. You'll find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. You remember when Linus says this? Do you know that almost got struck out of the Peanuts Christmas story because that was a little bit too daring for the people who are going to produce it? No, you don't do this kind of Bible stuff on Christmas. We want jingle bells and Christmas trees, but to have it to be so prominent and have it just stare you in the face right smack dab in the middle of this whole thing with Charlie Brown's Christmas. And there's Linus telling us, Charlie Brown, this is what Christmas is all about. A baby that's being given to you. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, well, let's go on to the next passage. Just after that, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, which I stupidly summarized as he'll be in politics. Okay, so how are those two statements radically different, and what does the Isaiah passage tell us? What do you see? Okay, so not just be in politics, but he'll actually carry not politics, but carry government. So what's the difference between government and politics? I know we're quite jaded against politicians, but in the best sense, government is what? Right judgment, yeah. What else? Representation of the people, by the people, for the people. Yeah, in its best sense. It's a framework. It's order in a society. Yeah. They oversee, right? And there's profound issues about justice. We kind of touched on the edges. And why is justice a big issue? Well, who wants to live in a society where there's always bad stuff going on? Wouldn't it be nice to have a little order, please? Can we have some order, please? Well, that's what government is meant to do. And some of the earliest founders of our country said, we're going to put together some rules and some laws in the United States, but we're going to make them kind of thin. They're not going to be exhaustive. Because what we're relying upon is the fact that people will, by and large, if they're a religious people, they'll be sort of self-governing for most of the things in life. And so we don't have to write a lot of laws because they'll know that's stupid, we shouldn't do that. But we will write some laws from penalties so that people, when they do bad stuff, will be on top of it and we'll stop and say, no, that's not how our society works. That's not how our society works. But it was Adams. It was Adams who was president early on who said, the rules that we wrote were not for a selfish, sinful people. These were for religious people who were self-governed because their morals come from God. So that's what we're counting on. And later on, he writes in some other letters that, if that ever stops being the case, if the people in this country that we're founding stop being self-governed, moral people because of their religious background, then we're all toast. Well, he doesn't use that word, but that's what he states. So government in its best keeps order and resists evil. Resists evil. It resists all those things in a culture that we slide into because we're fallen creatures that ends up hurting each other. So it's there actually to penalize evil, to control and bring order, to bring a kind of a place where good can happen and good can flourish, where evil is oppressed and it's penalized. That's government in its best sense. So he's more than just a politician. He's actually involved in the process of bringing order and fighting evil and providing a place for good to flourish. That's what we say when he says government. Now, is he just a participant in that government? He is. Yeah, it'll be on his shoulder. Now you have to see this idea of this burden. You carry something. So it's on his shoulders, which means it's all up to him. It's all up to him. Truman says the buck stops here. That's what he had in his desk, President Truman. It's more than that. It's the fact that not only does the buck stop on Jesus' desk, like it did for President Truman, but he actually is the entire infrastructure of the control. He is in charge. Not just in charge and the top dog and the CEO of the government. He is the government. More than that. It's carrying the burden. So it's not just because government has to be good. It's because there's a love for the people that he wants things to go well and for their good. There's a concern. It's one of our problems with politicians is that many times we suspect that they're in government not because they really have a legitimate, real, heartfelt concern for their constituents, which is what we'd like. It's what we'd like. But we suspect that many times they're there just to kind of continue to protect their seat where they are. I mean, there's other motivations. Sometimes, even for the most corrupt politicians, it's so they can get close to the big cash flow that's happening in government, and they can, pick off some little pieces of it that no one will notice. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. But what we long for is someone who provides order and peace and who goes against evil because they love the people that are oppressed because of the evil. That's what we want. We want someone who cares for us. So when it says the government will be on his shoulders, he will carry the weight because of his concern and his love for the constituents, that he will make sure that this is a place that's orderly and that's godly and that evil is suppressed. Yeah, you want to say?
Yeah. Could you interpret that the government shall be upon his shoulders, that means the government will be watching Jesus very closely?
The government will be watching Jesus closely. Yeah, you could look at it that way. Yeah, they'll be on top of him, and they were. They were. It's a fascinating thing, and we know this really well. But Jesus was not well received by the power structures in Jerusalem. They were on his back all the time, And, it wouldn't be the case if he just came on the scene and he talked about, well, it's right that you do this and it's wrong when you do that. You look at the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, well, it's been said that this is what you shouldn't do, but I say if you even want to do it, you violated it. He did so many things. That shouldn't be a problem for most of the religious, powerful people in town. And by the way, you got to remember the fact that the biggest power brokers in Jerusalem were also the biggest religious brokers. Those were the two things. There was no separation of church and state in Jerusalem. The religious leaders were the power leaders. That should not threaten them. But what threatened them was something quite different about Jesus. What threatened them was the fact that he seemed to speak with authority, and people followed him. And that really twisted him. That really messed him up. Well, no, wait. We are the religious authorities. We are the ones that we tell people what they need to do and they do it. We're the ones on top of these things. They follow us. They don't follow him. But they started following him because he speaks with one's authority. And they could sense the fact that this one who had authority also cared for the people that listened to him. And that's where we get back to the shoulders thing, this burden, carrying this burden. And there is a burden from a people, and especially during chronologically the time of Isaiah, where there was a lot of oppression from other parts of the world on Israel itself. And when you're under that kind of geopolitical oppression and wars and stuff like that, you yearn for a day. Where you're not living in a war-torn place, where people are laying siege to your cities and people are dying from starvation and lack of water, and there's always a sword around, and it's just oppressive in the most major physical way you can imagine during Isaiah's time. They say, when will someone come who will bring order and peace, who's concerned about our well-being? Someone who engages with a powerful right hand for our benefit. When will that one come? Because right now, life stinks. See, that's what the yearning is for. Now, during the time of Isaiah, the oppressors were Assyria, and they were in the process of taking over the entire world. They were the superpower. They didn't care anything about anybody. They cared about what treasures they could carry away and how many slaves they could take. That's what they cared about. So the yearning during the time of Isaiah was to have someone who would stop that. Yeah, Steve. Carrying a lamb on his shoulders. Yeah, the care and the love. So that's all tied up in the shoulder idea. Yeah.
Could there also be reading into the governmental weight on the shoulders the fact that this is a one singular ruler who would carry everything, not I'm going to vote for so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so.
Right.
One ruler.
One ruler. Yeah. And that's emphasized by the previous verse. To you a child is born, son is given to you. This is one person. That's why the opening part of this entire verse is just so powerful. We're talking about a human being one. We're not talking about something else. We're not talking about a populist president. We're talking about one upon whom the entirety of all government, all rule and order and authority and opposition to evil is all on him, because the burden, the loving burden for the people is his. And he takes it. Yeah. Yeah, it's more than just to be in politics and be influential. There's something about, and that's a good comment, because there's something about the single-handedness of this one who will be to your benefit, to bring order and to oppose evil that comes on your doorstep. There's also a slight hint in here of a threat. Which that is to say, okay, sure, I'll go for a leader who comes and is on my side, who's protecting me from all the evil that seems to come to my doorstep. Oh, I'm big on that. That's just great. I love that. Makes my life easier. Yeah, but what if you're the one that's bringing evil to other people's doorsteps? What if you're the offender? Then this also carries the idea, if all the government is on his shoulders and he carries this as a loving burden for the ones that he loves, and you're involved on the other team bringing evil on other people, then this also is kind of a veiled threat. It seems to be a two-edged sword. Now, we all want justice until it applies to us. We all want fairness until it applies to us. And fairness in a fallen place where human beings are just riddled with evil, you really do not want fairness because you're an offender. You're not the offended. You're an oppressor. You're not the oppressed. Well, now, wait a second. People do bad things to me. Of course I'm oppressed. Well, in this culture, we're in this big stew of people who all have sin, who oppress each other and who are oppressed mutually. I mean, you're on both sides of the coin. So when this one comes who on his shoulders carries all rule for order and for oppressing evil and pushing it back, I'm sorry, but you may be on the wrong team. So it's kind of it's a two-edged sword. It's a veiled threat as well. But this one seems to be able to be in charge of anything that has to do with justice. This one. The government shall be upon his shoulders. There's also one other thing I just want to point out. This is implicit. I call myself Captain Obvious on some of these things. But to have that kind of loving burden placed on someone's shoulders implies the fact that someone placed it on their shoulders. A someone placed it on their shoulders. He didn't just happen to wake up one morning and go, oh, well, I've been elected king of the universe. No, someone has placed on him this loving burden to do this. Again, we're talking about the Father and we're talking about Jesus. He places this burden, born to die. So the government has been placed on his shoulders. It's on his shoulders. Okay, a couple of passages. This just precedes this verse, and it talks about this government. So if you say, well, I don't understand the government idea, well, look, it's just the previous verse. Of the increase of his government and of peace there shall be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it, to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. The Lord of hosts, that's the big guy. That's the Father. That's God. God himself is saying, this is my plan. It's the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. And by the way, when it says Lord of hosts, hosts means like an army. Think of like many, the hosts of heaven talks about the many power people involved in that structure. We're talking about angels and stuff like that. So the Lord of hosts actually says literally that this is the one who's in charge of all the powers of heaven. That's what the hosts mean. We're talking angels and all that kind of stuff. So God himself has designed this process for this one, and it turns out that it won't just be a single data point of government that will fall to the Assyrians or fall to the Babylonians. This is a government that once it's established, never stops. You mean it's not challenged? Well, yeah, it will be challenged, but nothing will ever overtake it. It's the government of all governments. It never will go away. I mean, let's read it again. The increase of his government and of peace, that's what you want government to do, peace, there will be no end. Now, on the throne of David, remember way back when you look in the Old Testament, you find out that David was going to be genetically in the line of him was going to be the Messiah. And that's extremely clear. And you see that somehow this person had to be ethnically a descendant of David. David was like the prototype of the Messiah, not a perfect man by far. I just drop a few names like Bathsheba and Uriah, not a perfect man by far, but he was a man after God's own heart. His intention was to rule Israel, to bring order and to oppose the evil that was trying to come into God's people. And as a shepherd, that's what he was when he lived in his father's house. As a shepherd, now he was a shepherd over Israel, and Israel was owned by God. The sheep were owned by God. So he operated as a king who always thought about what does the owner of the sheep want for the best for his sheep. As a shepherd, as a king, that's who he was. So here's David as this prototype of what a Messiah ought to look like in many respects in terms of thinking about the benefit to the people by thinking about God's love for them. That's what he did. And so he was that prototype. So God said, in fact, this is the time, if you look where there's peace in Israel, David is king, and everything looks like it's fine. And then David says, wait a second, something's wrong here. I'm living in this wonderful house now that we're in Jerusalem. It's a permanent house, and God's still living in a tent, the tabernacle that came from Egypt. God's still living in a tent here in Jerusalem. We have to do something about that. We need to give him a permanent house, right? So this is in 2 Samuel, by the way. So he goes about the whole idea about let's build God a real house, because that's the right thing to do. God shouldn't be living in a tent in town while I'm living in a nice house. And so God stops him and says, whoa, hold on now there, buddy. He doesn't quite say it like that, but he says basically, look, here's the deal. I don't want you to build the house. I want your son to build the house. And he's got reasons for this. But when he's saying this, God says something fascinating. He says, I don't want you to build me a house, but David, I'm going to build you a house. And he's looking around going, well, wait a second. I've got a house. I've got a house. And God says, no, like the house of David. When you say house, it's you and all your descendants after you. That's a house. So what God is saying to him is, I'm going to create for you an eternal house. In terms of government, in terms of control, in terms of people who are watching over my people. And then it becomes very explicit as you look at the minor prophets and major prophets, that what God is saying about David, I'm going to build you a house. He's saying that out of your descendants shall come the Messiah, who will be the king that you are just a prototype of. So that's clearly what he's saying. This is what this is. Now, if you're a Bible thinker, you're looking at this and you're saying, well, Jesus came in the first century and he did not establish a government that has no end. Did he? Well, we do know he comes twice. But did he establish that government when he came the first time? Yes. Yes. Because those that bring evil into God's family, into God's society, into God's people, the ones that bring evil, he defeated on the cross. Once and for all, it's finished. It's done. He established a kingdom where there is no evil that can impinge on it. He established that kingdom. Now you're saying, but he didn't get rid of all the bad guys. Well, he vanquished the bad guy, but there is still a day coming when in reality they will all be put away. So between the time when he starts his kingdom at the cross until the time he comes the second time, that actually in a sense is a millennial, multi-millennial long coming of the king. He starts. He establishes the vanquishing of the enemies forever. He vanquishes your enemies, spiritually speaking, have been vanquished forever at the cross. That's the kind of king I want, right? He's the one that brings order, that brings peace, that brings righteousness, which is a statement of all good things. He's the one that does this and establishes peace. But that in reality won't be finished until he comes the second time. In between, he'll allow it to coexist with us as we live here. We will be hip deep in sin and evil until he comes back the second time. But in the second time, there will be no tolerance of evil anymore. It won't even be allowed to be around anymore, and it will be vanquished and be gone. So it's kind of a period in which he comes and continues to come and continues to do what he does in terms of drawing people to himself. Evil is still there, but it's under his watchful eye. It's moderated, but in the end, it'll be completely eradicated. So indeed, yeah, he did. He did establish his kingdom. And it's with justice and with righteousness. And it's eternal. So that government, the vanquishing of the real enemies to you, that vanquishing has happened and it's done. It's finished. It's finished. Well, teacher, I've got a problem. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
We just sang Isaiah 61.
Isaiah 61. I know.
Rise up the brokenhearted, set the captives free.
All that. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And he says today this has been fulfilled in your hearing in Isaiah 61. Wow. That's a pretty nervy thing to say. Because Isaiah 61, it's a great thing you bring it up, is because they had looked at that and said, that's our solution to the Assyrians. You know, they're the ones that break our hearts. So someday this Messiah will come, and then Jesus stands up there in his hometown and reads Isaiah 61, reads it straight out, bind up the brokenhearted, and he says, closes the scroll and says, well, there you go. Today it's been fulfilled, and you're very witnesses of the very thing that happened. Here we are. I'm done. It does raise an interesting question we don't have time to look at but in this period in between the first coming and the second coming, between the start of the vanquishing evil once and for all there and then the finishing of doing away of all evil, why does he leave us in this in-between period where we're kind of hip deep in evil still? Why do that? And that's a much bigger question. It's a question about evil. And not just the evil that's hip deep, but actually affects our lives. And that's a much more profound question. Is it because he's not in control and the government's not on his shoulder anymore? It slipped off for a while? No, no, he's still in control. And even still to this point, to this very day, Satan has to actually go before God and ask, like in Job, has to ask permission to afflict us. And sometimes God says, okay, this much. So that's got to raise a lot of questions in your mind. But don't ever suspect the fact that what Jesus started in terms of vanquishing the enemy and finishing on the cross has somehow slipped and it's gone away because evil tends to touch you. That's not the case. But there will be a time coming where there will be no ability for evil to touch you anymore. And then God will say, okay, we're done here. And he wraps it up. Second coming. So that government, yeah, the government is like that. And this is all by God's design. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. So if you stand back and read this as a reader of Isaiah, are you telling me that one person, to us a child is born, a son is given, one person will have this responsibility from God to see to it that evil is vanquished and his people are protected? One person? It's really hard to get around the interpretation that it is one person, because it says a child is born, a son is given. That's one person. That's astonishing. So this verse, when it shows up in Isaiah, caused a lot of consternation to Israel and a lot of hope, because they said, if there ever was a great description of the Messiah, this one who would come, this has got to be him. This has got to be him. However, as this verse goes on, it gets more disturbing in that idea about the Messiah. Let's push on and look. Okay. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor. And I translated this, well, he'll have this reputation, and one of those reputation things is the fact that he's a good listener. So when you see his name is always a statement, an outward statement of reputation of the person. We lose that in our culture. We name people based on relatives and stuff like that. Often then they would name someone based on a characteristic of the person. So you would wait to name them actually until they displayed some kind of characteristic. That's what you would do. Which is why when Jesus sees Peter, he renames him, right? He renames a lot of people because he's showing a characteristic that's different. So when you see name anciently, think reputation. Think reputation. So he has a reputation, and the first one he's going to list here, this great one-man government who oppresses evil on our behalf, is a wonderful counselor. So what's different between a wonderful counselor and a good listener? What they say back to you. Same thing. It is. It is the same thing, but it's more. It does match. Wonderful counselors have to be good listeners. Yes? I mean, that's prerequisite to it. They have to be good listeners. Oh, okay. So perception about the circumstance that's troubling somebody. They have to understand the person and their circumstance. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What else is different in those? What's a wonderful counselor? Application of the knowledge specifically to our circumstance. With wisdom. Yeah, absolutely. You expect wisdom from a wonderful counselor. Instead of them saying, well, I don't know. Here's my off-the-cuff thinking. You want something that represents wisdom that's eternal and grounded, powerful, relevant to us. What else is different?
Well, I'm thinking there's a supernatural quality about a wonderful counselor, one with insight that is beyond the average human, right?
Beyond the average human, because of the wonderful part?
Because it's wonderful what he understands, right?
Yeah.
Causes wonder in you.
Causes
How do
wonder.
you know that?
Yep.
How did you understand that?
Yeah. So the wonder of wonderful strongly implies something divine. Implies someone who knows me so well that they can take the wisdom of the eternal ages from God and apply it to my circumstance and my unique heart and merge those together. And you'll stand back and say, that's wonderful counsel. How do they know me so well? How do they know my circumstance? Yeah, what else? How you give the feedback. Yeah. That's a good thought. We were talking about personal relationship, because many times someone gives me advice and I just throw it off because I say, you don't know what you're talking about. So there is a sense in which they have to be able to give me that advice in a way that I'll be receptive to hear it. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, and I think that's very powerful. Wisdom has traction in our lives based on how it's applied, and knowing that we're not just going to blow it off. And we're all unique in that way. We all have unique receptors to wisdom. And so this wonderful counselor understands that, understands how to get traction that way. Yeah, Jeff.
Just kind of based on what Dorothy said, if you go back to those first verses,
Right, the first verses.
translated boy, it says son.
Yeah.
Son shows a preeminence. Son shows a special.
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
So kind of Dorothy's point,
yeah.
that shows that supernatural.
Yeah, the supernatural, we're saying when you go back to the opening verses, is not just a baby's born, it's a boy. We're talking about a son, which implies strongly kind of this connection to the divine Father. Yeah, authority, ability to understand us. Yeah. Any other thoughts on wonderful counselor?
Going off of what Jeff just said,
Yeah,
the Son was also God the Son, the Creator. That's how he knows us. That's how he has that.
right. A son who is also God the Son of the Father. And who's the one that made you and understands you? Well, God himself. Is he equipped to understand me? Well, he made me. Is he equipped to understand the circumstances that so pester me? Yes, because he's omniscient. He sees, he understands. But did he ever walk in my moccasins? Did he ever walk in my shoes to understand? Yes. Yeah, and Hebrews writes about the fact that we have this great high priest who can sympathize with our problems, because he's been here. He knows. That's what's so wonderful about this counselor. He knows us. He knows how we'll receive his message. He knows how to give expert wisdom applied to the unique circumstance we're dealing with. He understands everything about the circumstance. He understands everything. So when you're in the middle of a circumstance that causes your head to just swirl like a tornado, and you have no clarity about what you're supposed to do next or how you're supposed to weather this thing, he kind of calms you down and says, let me tell you about your circumstance. It's just this. Let me tell you about who you are. You're overreacting, or you're not understanding this really well. I understand your heart. I love your heart, but think about this. And so I'm going to say something profoundly wise, and that will settle your heart in the midst of the circumstance. Counselors also do something. Okay, I'll add some Captain Obvious stuff. In a counseling session today, we understand that 99 out of 100 times, the counselor cannot change your circumstance. Are you saying God can't change your circumstance? He can. But when we're talking about the fact with the wonderful counselor, his counsel is so wonderful, it's effective despite our circumstance, in the face of our circumstance, and engaged in our circumstance. A counselor doesn't say, oh, I didn't realize that was going to be a problem for you. I'll send a telegram to heaven to have it changed, and the circumstance changes. That's not what a counselor does. A counselor says, here's how I'm going to counsel you about how you weather this circumstance, and how you're understanding who you are, how you're understanding who God is, how you're understanding how to live wisely with those two understandings. That's what a wise counselor does. They don't solve the problem by focusing on the circumstance. They solve the problem by focusing on your heart. On your heart. That's what a wonderful counselor does. Yeah, Steve. A lot of people don't want to go to a counselor. Yeah. The solution in the gift is not going to be received. Yeah. You have to have an admission of a problem rather than just saying, I've got this. Don't we normally, a lot of times, you get into circumstance and you say, well, God, here's what's going on with me right now. Let me describe my circumstance to you. This is bad. That's bad. This is unfolding. This could get worse. And you know what? Out of that whole list, God, I've got items 1 through 6, but item 7's just hard for me. So I've got those parts. So can you just take care of item 7 and we'll be okay? Why are you laughing? Because we all do this. We all do this. Yeah. Yeah. So you look at what you can handle, and then when you realize, oh, there's a line here, I can't handle this past this point. Then you say, well, I guess my only option is to go to God. Well, interestingly enough, that's not a bad reflex, because in trying circumstances, God's trying to tell you something about yourself. You may be able to more or less handle some parts of the trivialities of the problem, but in the end, God's trying to get you to explore what you're capable of and what you're not capable of and what He is capable of. That's the whole reason why the stress is there. And if we wanted to make a case for the presence of evil, that's one of the founding cases, is there's nothing like stress to give you an understanding of who you are really and who God is really. Right? And if everything is hunky-dory and there is no stress, you don't explore those two topics. You don't understand your limitations. You don't understand your own sinfulness in the middle of the circumstance. And you certainly don't understand more about who God is. And we've said this many times. If you come through really trying seasons in your life, and we've all had them, when you come to those seasons and you get on the back end of it, when you get after them, you look back and go, man, I'm glad that's not happening anymore. But when you go back and you realize what God has done in your heart through that process, you go, but that was gold. That was gold. By God, I don't want to do that ever again. Because that was pretty stressful. Yeah. But he's just trying to get you to understand who you are really and who He is really. And the intersection of those two, the contrast is heightened during times of stress. Now, the other Captain Obvious thing here is the fact that this one on whom the loving burden and shoulder of justice and righteousness and the oppression of evil, this one on whom so much is resting, somehow has an intimate role in counseling you. Can that exist in one person? I mean, really? I used to imagine as a kid that God's switchboard was so full, He's not going to listen to my prayers, because after all, there's lots of people praying to Him. How can He possibly have any intimate understanding of what I'm going through and any care for me? Because the switchboard is ringing off the hook all the time. He's busy with all these other big problems He doesn't know about mine. Isn't that the preoccupation of someone on whom the whole government is on? Right? Can He possibly handle the issues of justice in the world and the oppression of evil? Can He handle all those big issues and still be a wonderful counselor? This is what's so remarkably good about the good news about this one who has a scope that affects the entirety of pushing back on evil and bringing righteousness and good. He has an effect over that in huge scope in the universe and all mankind, and at the same time is your wonderful counselor. I mean, when you put those side by side, which they are in the text, it should blow your mind. It should blow your mind. So when He engages on our behalf to push back on evil, because He knows it's bad for us, it hurts us, it destroys us, because after all, the wages of sin is death. So this is death that's constantly knocking on our doors in the form of sin. Can He understand my circumstance well enough that He's not preoccupied with the whole government issue, that He can actually say, I uniquely understand your heart, I uniquely understand your circumstance, and you need to focus on the loving kindness of God, and intimately right now, let me bring you a little tidbit of wisdom to connect you with that reality of God Himself. He can. It's the most marvelous thing. It's the most marvelous thing. I've always thought, when you read through the Gospels and you see Jesus's attraction to different people, how they listen to Him. We know one of the attractions people had was they said, look, we listen to Him and he speaks like one who's got authority, which implies that the other dudes don't. He doesn't speak like anyone else. And yet, what I really love is the fact that in His interactions with people so many times in the Gospels, it's a wonderfully intimate moment. Although He's got the entire burden of the world's government and justice and righteousness on His shoulders, He's got time to talk to anybody who shows up. Even the lowest. We're talking people with diseases like lepers who have to be excluded from the community or they'll be contagious. He's talking about the least valued, women and children. In fact, remember those scenes when Jesus was with the children and the apostles basically barge in and say, come on now, we got more important things to do here. That's me putting my words in their mouth. But they basically come in and say, this is inappropriate. We got more important things to do. After all, the entire burden of government is on your shoulders. Who's got time to sit with kids? And Jesus says, I do. I have time to sit with kids. Back off. Back off. And in fact, he uses that moment to say, look, you don't understand. You've got to become more like these kids. Oh, okay. So there's this wonderful, intimate, wonderful counselor kind of view about how he deals with people in the midst of all that. And yet there's so much on his shoulders, but it doesn't stop him. Because in his loving kindness toward the society of the followers of Jesus, he also has a wonderfully focused, intimate connection with each one of them. That's you and I. That's you and I. Wow. So yeah, he's more than a good listener. Let me show you some passages. John 6. Is he a wonderful counselor? Well, many of the disciples are getting ready to turn back because Jesus did some outrageous things in John 6. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go read John 6. But at that point, Jesus says to the 12 in verse 67 of John 6. So Jesus says to the 12, so, do you want to go away as well? And Simon Peter answered him and said, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Wonderful counselor. You have the words of eternal life. Okay, let's go to the next section. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor. There's just so much packed in that is so unique and intimate and relevant and consoling and peaceful. Wonderful counselor. Wonderful counselor. Oh, by the way, just as a tip, the next time your circumstances impress upon you your inability to meet the circumstance, just remember wonderful counselor. Go to him and say, Lord, you said you're the wonderful counselor. I'm in deep need of counsel. And you can make that the open-ended prayer that you have in the moment. I know you see what's going on. I know you see the turmoil in my heart. I know you see the confusion with me trying to figure out what to do in my next steps. I just don't know what to do. But you do. You're a counselor. You're a wonderful counselor. So Lord, I sit and I wait for you. It's just really a great way to look at circumstance, because what it does is it takes your eyes not only off of the circumstance, but onto him as the one who's in control and him who is the wonderful counselor. And that's why I've mentioned this before many times. Dorothy and I, when we talk to people and they recite for us the trauma of their circumstance, and it's real trauma. It's nasty. We let them describe the trauma in vivid color stereo. I mean, we let them really get into, let me tell you what's wrong, and they do it. And then 9 times out of 10, we say, well, you didn't mention anything about God's presence in this circumstance. Where's God in all this is what we ask. Where's God in all this? So many times the issue with the turmoil is to turn your eyes to God. And so we try and help people to turn their eyes toward God. You know, he is a wonderful counselor. You know, he is omniscient. He knows what's going on. And he's allowed you to go through this. Let's go to him together and ask him why and what it is he's got in store for you that can be gold in the middle of this horrible circumstance. So that's just by way of what we do. Okay, let's move on. The one man is mighty God, and I just said silly. He seems to get a lot done. So what's different? What's big about the mighty God statement as it applies to this one? Powerful. In fact, he could have just said God. But it seems almost superfluous to say, mighty God. Well, don't those go hand in hand? Well, yeah, they do. But he's trying to tell you something by saying he's mighty. He's mighty. Okay, so take that idea of mighty God and couple it together with wonderful counselor and governments on his shoulder. Yeah. Dependable. Dependable. Yeah. What makes him dependable, by the way? What aspect of his character makes him dependable? He's dependable because that's his track record, because that's what he does. He comes and he intercedes for us. He met me in the past. He'll meet me in the future. And oh, by the way, there's nothing I'm bringing to him right now that's over his head. I'm not asking him to do anything that's above his pay grade. That makes him dependable too, because he's capable. He's capable. Why? Because he's mighty. He's mighty. There's nothing that's above his might. He can do anything. He can do anything. This one. Yeah. Yeah, he has done. Yeah. He's created everything. So what makes you think that your situation right now is beyond his reach? It's not. It's not. Not beyond his reach. He doesn't, say it again, he doesn't. Oh, God does not get a failing grade at anything. Yeah, that's true. However, if he's slow to respond, which is deliberate on his part, we tend to give him a failing grade. David did in the Psalms many times. You know, when David was in a lot of stress, especially when he was being chased by Saul. And David's not king yet, but Saul's king, and Saul's trying to protect his kingship, so he's following after him. And David wrote some Psalms, many of them that start off with lines that I would think would get you vaporized with a lightning bolt from heaven. So God, are you sleeping? He says this. Are you sleeping? Look at this. Yeah. I mean, yeah. He's mighty. This is like a force multiplier for everything that came before this in the verse and everything that comes after. There is no ability that God is short on when it comes to him engaging on your behalf, whether it's counseling you in a wonderful way or that's pushing back evil and bringing peace into your life, which is what the government does. There's no way in which any of these things are above him. He is supremely empowered and able to meet any of these things because he's the one. He's the one. He's the one. Okay. Wow. Okay. I got a lot more things to say that, but it really is, think of it more as a force multiplier. Here's a great statement in John 5. Is Jesus this mighty God? John 5:18. This is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Unto us a child is born, a son is given. And Jesus strutted that fact out early in the Gospels. And they said, you can't make that kind of claim. So they said, you're blaspheming because clearly you're not the mighty God. You're not the all-powerful. You're not equal with God. Clearly you're not, because, there would be, little lightning bolts coming off your fingertips or something crazy like that, but you're clearly not him. You're the one who worked in that carpenter shop up there in Galilee. So you're not that guy. So they started to pick up stones to take him out. Whew. And this is not the only time that John records that Jesus crossed that line, speaking the truth about who he was. But they wanted to kill him because they saw it as blasphemy because he wasn't him. He is indeed the mighty God. Here's another one. John 17, when Jesus prays, and John records for us this wonderful prayer that Jesus prays on behalf of the apostles and his followers, and us, by the way, in the end of John 17. John 17:5, and now, Father, check this out, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed. Yeah, and John, yeah. I mean, it's, yeah. You mean, before the world existed, I had glory like you had? What? So when we look at Jesus, there's no reason why we shouldn't actually see him as mighty God. The one. Okay, let's try another section. Mighty God, and then he goes to everlasting Father. And I just said simply and kind of provocatively, he's always around. So what is everlasting Father? Both those words have powerful things, but especially together. So how is everlasting Father better than just he's always around? Yarich. The beginning and the end. So he encompasses all time, all experience. Yeah, everlasting. So he's not just around, but like a father, he's effective, he's protective, he loves us, he cares for us.
Well, putting Father together with everlasting
Father and everlasting.
always has been Father. He didn't become a father when Jesus was born.
Right.
Always has been loving like a father, life-giving like a father. That's the center of who he is.
Yeah, so this is not a characteristic of his being that just started. It has always been, even before mankind was made. And you have to look at Father from its most ideal idea. In a nuclear family, ancient and even now, although it's kind of going away, the role of the father includes a lot of aspects that are singular to him in terms of being protective, being a provider, being so many of those kinds of things. The typical ideal father idea. So you take those characteristics of what a father is like, and you say that is part and parcel of who God himself is. He has those characteristics of this protection and provision and so much more, and loving kindness and willingness to be there on the spot whenever you need him. I mean, all these things that the perfect father is like. So sometimes we get messed up when we use the father idea and say, well, father means a son. Well, there is a son, but what you need to do is take all the characteristics of a perfect father and say that itself is the heart of God. When God made mankind, he knew he was making a creation that was going to be a little unrelatable back to him, because after all, God's a spirit and we're going to be creations. And so he creates all these relationships that are part and parcel and normal part of human experience, like parents and fathers and mothers and children and employers and employees and all these relationships. But in this particular case, he wants to say, look, you know what a good father is like. That's what I'm like. Oh, so you're actually giving us a model? Yeah, we understand what good fathers are like. That's part and parcel of our understanding as human beings. He says, so if you want to understand more, get more insight about my heart, what's a perfect father like? What does a perfect father do? That's who I am. And so that's what he's saying right here. But this is a father who has a care and a concern for mankind that actually preceded the creation of mankind. Wow. And John tries to capsulize this by saying it another way, by saying that God is love. He says that in his gospel. He says it in his letters. God is love. Well, then the question begs itself, well, before God made mankind, who is the object of his love? God is love. And we know that in the Trinity, in the Godhead, there is love there. You see that in John 17 as well, as Jesus talks about it as the Son. So God's basic characteristic is love, to be on the outlook for benefit to you and I because he loves us so much. And that clearly is the heart of this one as well. So this also, and more Captain Obvious stuff, this starts to raise a whole bunch of questions about the Trinity. I thought we were talking about Jesus, the Son of God, when we talked about this section in Isaiah 9. Well, we are. Well, then how can you call him a son is given and he's the Father too? The Trinity. Because there's an indistinguishableness about their nature and heart that can't be separated. But they are separated because there's the one who's in the flesh, and then there's the Father himself. I mean, and if you're saying, Jim, you're not really explaining that well, it's because the Trinity is a hard thing to explain. But there is an identity here that's going on that Isaiah is deliberately trying to provoke in you. How can the Messiah, who is sent from the Father, actually be the Father? See that? So that tension is what you need to kind of look at and go, wow, yeah. But don't let it twist you up too much. But understand the fact that, remember I said when you see the title Father, think about what's characteristic of the ideal Father in terms of protection and provision. Is Jesus in the business of protection and provision? Yes. Is the Father in the deal? Is he in the business of protection, provision? Yes. Is the heart the same? Yes. Why? Because he's God. They have the same heart. And Jesus, he actually nails this down a couple times. And again, it makes your head kind of twist for a second trying to unwind this. But he says, look, everything I say is what God has told me to say. And everything I do is what God has told me to do. So who has that kind of identification with someone else, that everything that's said and everything that's done, what I say and what I do is exactly the same and reflective of the Father? And in fact, he tells me to do that. Well, that's kind of an identity in the Trinity that it gives you an idea that they're actually one. They're one, but they're different. Well, how can that be? Well, just work on that for a while. Christian Jews have been working on that for 2,000 years. But it's clearly here. And clearly this whole phrase right here, if before you got to this point, if you were a Jew, you're reading, okay, I get this is the Messiah. Now I'm having problems with the fact that we call this Messiah mighty God. Okay, now I got a problem with that. And now I'm really having a problem because we're calling this Messiah also the everlasting Father. You're really messing with my mind here. I thought God had his man and he sent him into the world and he has the authority and power of God and things can happen. But you're kind of saying that they're one and the same. And that's why we often talk about the incarnation, the coming of Jesus, as God himself coming in the flesh. Because that's what it is. Okay, a couple other passages. We're talking about mind blowers here. This was a real mind blower. A very contentious chapter that Jesus had with the Pharisees, John 8:58. Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." Well, and the reaction? Not good. They wanted to kill him again. Because they said, that's blasphemy. No one can say that. No one can say that. Maybe, if we go with Isaiah 9, maybe we could say that about the Messiah, but you're clearly not him. So you can't just say that, let's kill him, he's blasphemous. But he does a little trick here that passes many of us. Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, and then he uses the covenant name of God. I am. I am. Whoa. So what Jesus does is he says, before Abraham, and who's Abraham? He's the father of our nation, right? He's the one that started the whole Jewish nation, right? And Abraham's the guy who talked to God. God brought him out of Ur of the Chaldees, said, I'm going to give you this land, and your descendants are going to be like sand in the seashore. That's Abraham. Well, before him, I am. Well, that's about the clearest identity that Jesus draws between the fact that he and the Father are one. Because he uses the Father's name to identify himself. Wow. Okay, this is that one. Well, and he has an old soul. I just put that into to say it's kind of like being a father. You see some kids when they're growing up in adolescence who we call them old souls because they have before their age, before you really expect it. There's a wisdom, there's a caring. There's something about them that understands the needs of other people, and we call them old souls. How did you get that? Because clearly you didn't get that from 6th grade. Came from somewhere else. But that's just my silly way of saying that. Okay, let's move on now. Oh, I forgot this. Just in case you were wondering if Jesus ever made that claim, he says in John 10, I and the Father are one. Ding, 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 ding. Yeah. Trinity issues. Oh, check this out. Check this out. Yeah, that's one you were thinking of? Yeah, oh gosh. Yeah, so Jesus is with the apostles. He's on the brink of being crucified that night, and they're having this upper room discussion. And they ask him, well, why don't you just show us the Father? And Jesus says, have I been with you so long and you still don't know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Hello? So, there's many more passages we could look at where Jesus identifies with the Father. So to have in the Isaiah passage, the fact that we're talking about everlasting Father for the one is not a stretch, because Jesus reinforces that almost on every page of the Bible. Okay, now let's push on to the next one. The next one is the last one, the Prince of Peace. And I just said he helps everyone sort of get along. Okay, why is that such a gross understatement compared to the statement, Prince of Peace? He just helps people get along. He is the peace. He's not just helping the peace. He is the peace. Well, let's explore that for a second. What does that mean? He is the peace. Because that's accurate. He is the peace. The Prince of Peace. How can he be the peace?
There's an absence of conflict.
Absence of conflict.
There's a wholeness there with peace.
So there's an absence of conflict, a wholeness about the peace. Right, it's not just dealing with one conflict, but it is the fact that there is no conflict in the peace. Peace is always, in the Old Testament especially, is defined in relation to warfare, where you're at war with somebody else, and then when that warfare stops, you're at peace. So it's always the cessation of warfare is what it's all about. So it does beg the question, where is the war and with whom? Yeah, you gonna say?
Maybe it's not just like something like war conflict, but a personal conflict, like argument. Maybe there still is, but
Yeah.
they'll find a sense of solace, even though they disagree. They have one, I guess, like focal point where they can all relax and be in
Ooh, so in the conflict they can all relax because what? There's like something in common that causes you to stop the conflict. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think that's pretty accurate. Because the conflict that you have with someone else interpersonally, it's a real conflict. I mean, there's real things that cause us to be in conflict with other people, and to in our own minds, if it's not resolved, to be at war with that person from that point on for the rest of our life, because it's a matter of principle. So there is a war that's going on. So let's look at the conflicts. What is it that Jesus, as the Prince of Peace, what is the conflict that he solves? Or conflicts? So what?
Our sinful ways.
Our sinful ways. Does that put us in a conflict? With God himself. Mankind is in active rebellion. When mankind fell into sin and continues to propagate sin, you are in active warfare with God himself. And Paul brings this up. There's a warfare. You basically stiff-armed God and said, okay, you may be the creator, but I don't really care about that. You gave me my life. You gave me my circumstance. I like where I'm at. I don't need you anymore. Blah, blah, blah. Go away. Bye. And so you've basically not only been ungrateful for that kind of stuff, but you've actually left him in rebellion. Have you ever had a good friend that you did so much for and you thought about and cared for, give them presents, do all this kind of stuff, and then one day they turn around and say, thanks, that's good enough. Bye. I'm out of your life. I don't want to see you anymore. I'd prefer not to see you anymore. Mankind is in active war with God. That's the problem. And it evidences itself as we put ourselves in active war with other people on a local level. And why are we at war? Because we think that I am the biggest thing in the universe. And so if anything conflicts with me on my level with other people, you're wrong. I'm right, and I will always be right. I will always be the righteous one in these circumstances because, after all, I'm the center of the universe, and I'm always good, and you're always wrong. Okay, I'm overstating it a little bit, but not much. And so conflict arises not only because you think that, but because the other person thinks that about themselves too. So now you have two gods that are fighting one another, and you have this conflict over the fact that I'm right, no, you're wrong. No, I'm right, and you're wrong. No, I deserve this, no, you don't. Right? Because you're the center of the universe. As long as you're the center of the universe, then there's no way in which you can find common ground with all the other centers of the universe that you live with every week. There's always going to be conflict. You're always going to be at war at one another because there's two wills that are in clashing. And that's exactly the same thing between you and God as well. As long as you see yourself as the center of the universe and everything is all about you, and it's not about God, you're going to be at war with God. That's just the way it works. So there is a war going, and there is peace that happens. Now, how is Jesus let's just take it up to the highest level. How is Jesus not assisting in peace, but he is indeed the peace between us and God? How did he stop the war? His death. His death. His death stopped the war. Really? Yes. Because then a just God can say, My wrath has been visited on my son instead of on Jim. And as a result of that, we can find peace. There's peace. The war has ended. The war has ended. He himself is the offering that made the war stop. And the minute that we accepted that offering that stopped the war, then we could establish relationship with God. The other idea about peace is not only is it a warfare thing, but it's a separation thing. So in the New Testament, in the Greek, it's more of an idea of two separated parties actually coming near together. Because something separates you. That's why you're at war. And then you come together. So you put that together with the warfare idea in the Old Testament. And you have this idea that Jesus himself is the one who stopped the conflict and brought the two parties together. He is our peace. Yeah.
I have a weird comment. You just changed the song for me to the War is Over Christmas.
Oh, the war is over. Yeah. Yeah. The war is over. He stopped the war. Your favorite song. Well, that's the whole idea. So here we are. You know, Paul says in a remarkable way, he says, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Oh my gosh. Now, when you look at the manger scene, it's even bigger than that. While we were actively sinning and stiff-arming God altogether, he offers himself as a baby to stop the war once it gets to the cross. And knowing that it's fully going to be antagonistic to the culture at the time, they're going to try and fight against us. We don't want peace, Satan would say. We want war. We want continual war. That's what we want. And so early on when Jesus is born, you know, Herod tries to kill him. He kills hundreds, maybe thousands of baby boys trying to stop this initiative from God himself. And God, in his wonderful way about how he confounds the powerful with the weak, confounds powerful Herod with a weak baby. And he can't stop the initiative. This is the baby that's given to stop the war. Yeah. What about the fact that it's prince and not king?
Okay. Prince is the son of a king.
Prince is the son of a king.
Come into the kingdom.
And he's going to come into the kingdom.
Forward with it.
Yes. It's not all, all those things. He's the one that's sent into the problem with the full authority of the king, the father, the king. He has the full authority to do it kind of in a distant sense. So you would send a prince to a battlefield, you wouldn't send the king many times. But the prince has the full power, the full authority, the full identity of the king himself. He's usually related. He's the son of the king. So all those things, it's a very fitting thing to kind of emphasize the fact that in order to bring peace, he had to be sent into the battlefield. That's what the prince is meant to imply. But with the full power, full authority of the king. Oops, go back. Did I skip too many? Go back. Okay, here's the one. Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, he's smitten dumb for a while, then he gets his voice back when John the Baptist is born, and he prophesies through the Holy Spirit. And he says this about both John the Baptist and Jesus. He talks about this prophecy. And respective to Jesus, he says, the sunrise shall visit us from on high. He's sent into the battlefield. The sunrise shall visit us from on high. It literally visit us means look in on. To give light to those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Prince of Peace. And then here in Luke 2, the angels to the shepherds, glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace among those with whom he is pleased, or those who line up with him and follow him. Peace is the result of that. And then Jesus underscores that as well in Mark 4. When he stands on the boat and looks to the raging seas, and he says he woke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased and there was great calm. So even as peace extends not only between our war with God, our war with one another, but nature itself recognizes that this is a guy whose job is peace. Chill, he says to the waves, and suddenly it's flat. And then here, Jesus says again in his parting discussions with the apostles, John 16:33, I've said these things to you that in me you may have peace. Okay, in the world, you'll have tribulation. You'll have tribulation, but take heart. I've overcome the world. And that's how the Prince of Peace can bring peace, because he has overcome the world, which is in itself a place of warfare between ourselves and between us and God. He's come into it. He's overcome the world. So again, he doesn't say necessarily that he will allow you to avoid tribulation. What he says is that in the midst of tribulation, which you'll have, I've overcome the world, so everything's fine. Okay, we need to wrap up our thinking here. So here's the verse we know of. Unto us a child is born, a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And that should get you excited at Christmas, because that one is the one who called you to himself. All those things. All those things. All those things. Okay, we're going to sing this song one more time. So let me just pray. We'll sing our way out with this new song. Father in heaven, we are astonished by the compact nature of these profound truths in this one little verse. And Father, as we look at that baby in the manger, so helpless and so weak, so dependent, so needy it seems, we understand babies really well. You're making such a profound statement to all mankind that even the weakest initiative from God is more powerful than all the machinations of Satan and all the machinations of the fallen mankind. The Prince of Peace. And Father, we pray that during this season, that as we find ourselves in lots of self-imposed chaos because of all the work and things that we're doing, so many of that we enjoy, but we pray that you'd give us moments of peace to sit still and marvel at the fact that this one is the one who's been given to us, a child and a son, in order that the mighty God himself would be our wonderful counselor and our Prince of Peace. Profoundly relevant and earth-shaking. He is the one. So we thank you. Draw our hearts to you this season, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.